The text message from Kevin arrived at 11:47 p.m. Expect a call from our lawyer tomorrow. Time to discuss your future at Innovate Tech. I stared at my phone screen, a cold smile spreading across my face. My future at Innovate Tech. If only he knew I'd already decided it 3 days ago when I discovered their little conspiracy. Everything okay? Brian asked, looking up from his laptop where he was reviewing legal briefs for his own firm. Perfect, I replied, setting the phone aside. Everything is finally becoming clear. 10 years earlier, I'd started Innovate Tech in my parents' garage with $5,000 in savings and a dream of building affordable software solutions for small businesses. Fresh out of engineering school during the worst recession in decades, I'd faced 63 rejections before realizing no one would give me the opportunity I needed. I had to create it myself. Those early days blurred together 18-hour coding sessions, ramen noodles for every meal, sleeping on a camping mat beside my makeshift desk. My parents would peek into the garage with concerned expressions, gently suggesting maybe it was time to apply for real jobs. I'd smile and tell them I was close to a breakthrough. Sometimes I even believed it. The breakthrough came 6 months later, with our first product streamlined inventory management software that small businesses could actually afford. While major companies charged thousands for complex systems, I created something simple and accessible. When our first 10 customers signed up, I celebrated with my first non-ramen meal in months, a burger that tasted like victory. But success brought its own challenges. I couldn't do everything alone anymore. Growth came rapidly. Within 2 years, we'd moved from the garage to a real office above a pizza shop, then to progressively larger spaces, as our customer base exploded from hundreds to thousands. Revenue hit $1 million, then $5 million, then $10 million annually. That's when I made the decision that would eventually lead to my downfall, bringing in family. Kevin, my younger brother, had just graduated with an MBA and seemed perfect for our growing financial needs. He'd always been brilliant with numbers, though I'd noticed his subtle competitiveness since childhood, the way he'd correct my math homework or challenge my business ideas at family dinners. "This is amazing, Mel," he'd said, hugging me after signing his contract. "I'll never forget what you've done for me. We're going to make this a family legacy." Amanda, my sister, brought marketing expertise and natural warmth I lacked. Creative, but insecure. She constantly sought validation for her ideas. Her campaigns were innovative, but she'd second-guess herself until I provided reassurance. Ryan, our cousin, joined after his own startup failed spectacularly. Smooth-talking and experienced in sales, he could charm clients effortlessly, but I sometimes caught glimpses of bitterness beneath his polished exterior, quick flashes of resentment when discussing his past ventures. I gave each of them 10% equity while maintaining my controlling 51%. The remaining 19% went to early employees and investors. "We're building something special here," Amanda had promised. "A real family business." Those words would haunt me. The next few years were intoxicating. Our software suite expanded. Our client base grew into the thousands, and revenue soared. We moved to a downtown building with our logo displayed proudly outside. Industry publications featured us in success stories. Competitors tried to poach our talent. Through it all, I maintained the work ethic that built us first in, last out, personally involved in every major decision. Friends' weddings were missed for product launches. Dating happened sporadically between major projects. Building a family remained a distant, someday dream. 3 months ago, everything changed when Goldman Sachs approached us about an IPO. Innovate Tech has the metrics for a successful public offering, their lead banker explained. Conservative estimates put your valuation at $200 million. The pressure that followed was immense. Suddenly, every decision carried IPO implications. Board meetings became tenser, investor scrutiny intensified, and my family began questioning my leadership more openly. It started small. Kevin would interrupt my presentations to clarify my points. Amanda began making comments about my technical focus, limiting our vision. Ryan wondered aloud whether my management style was too hands-on for a company our size. "Maybe you should delegate more," Kevin suggested during one leadership meeting. "Focus on product development and let us handle the business side. You look tired, sis." The Try Our Solutions dinner should have been a celebration. They represented our biggest potential client, a nationwide chain looking to overhaul their digital infrastructure. After months of proposals, this meeting was supposed to be a formality before signing contracts. I arrived early, reviewing presentation points, when Kevin, Amanda, and Ryan walked in 15 minutes late. Something felt off immediately. They'd clearly been discussing something that stopped when they saw me. Throughout dinner, I presented our implementation strategy to the Trier executives. But every time I explained our technical capabilities, Kevin would interrupt, "What Melanie means is," or, "While my sister handles the coding side, our executive team has developed a more comprehensive approach." And by dessert, I felt invisible at my own meeting. When the CEO asked about our 5-year expansion plan, Kevin answered without even glancing my way. "We're moving toward enterprise-level solutions," he said confidently. "The small business market Melanie initially targeted was a good starting point, but we've outgrown that vision." I nearly choked on my water. This was the first I'd heard about abandoning our core market, the very clients who'd made us successful. On the ride back, I confronted him. "What was that about outgrowing our small business market?" Kevin glanced at Amanda in the back seat. "It's just business talk." "Mel, Trier wants to hear we're thinking big." "That's a fundamental pivot to decide without discussing it with the CEO," I replied. "You've been so busy with the technical side," Amanda chimed in. "We didn't want to bother you with every strategic discussion." Every strategic discussion, like completely changing our company's direction. That night, I stayed late at the office, troubled by the interaction. Walking to the break room around 9 p.m., I overheard Amanda's voice from the conference room. The door was ajar. "Melanie's brilliant with product, but she's becoming a liability in client meetings," she was saying. "She's too attached to the original vision. We need someone more flexible at the helm." "The board's concerned, too," came Ryan's voice. "They're wondering if we need a more experienced CEO to take us to the next level." I froze, coffee mug halfway to my lips. Since when did my family have private conversations with our board about replacing me? Over the following weeks, I noticed more troubling patterns. Meeting invites arrived last minute or after meetings had already occurred. Decisions about hiring senior positions would be presented as finalized, needing only my rubber stamp. When I pushed back, I'd get exasperated sighs and comments like, "We discussed this last week. Mel, don't you remember?" The gaslighting became so systematic that I started questioning my own memory. I began keeping detailed notes, my engineering mind suggesting documentation might prove useful. Meanwhile, my personal life was shifting dramatically. After 2 years of marriage, Brian and I had started trying for a baby. When the pregnancy test showed positive last month, joy mixed with terror. How could I bring a child into this chaos? The stress took its toll. I lost weight, developed insomnia, and caught myself snapping at employees who didn't deserve it. During video calls, I noticed my own hollow-eyed reflection, a shadow of the confident founder I'd once been. "You need to confront them directly," Brian urged one evening as I picked at dinner. Appetite gone. "This is your company. Melanie, don't let them make you doubt yourself." He was right, but confrontation felt dangerous. If they were truly planning something, alerting them might accelerate their timeline. Instead, I decided to investigate. My investigation began with the methodical precision that had built Innovate Tech from nothing. If my family was conspiring against me, there would be digital footprints there always were. I started with email metadata, analyzing patterns I'd previously ignored. Administrative access to our company systems revealed a shadow communication network that chilled me to the bone. Group threads excluding me entirely. Calendar invitations for strategic planning sessions sent only to Kevin, Amanda, and Ryan. board member conversations happening through encrypted messaging apps I'd never seen before. The first smoking gun came through expense reports. Kevin had been having regular lunches with Jonathan Grant, Technovate's CEO meetings he'd never mentioned to me. Amanda had charged multiple client dinners that weren't in our CRM system. Ryan had booked conference rooms at hotels downtown for sales meetings with no corresponding deals in our pipeline. They weren't just plotting, they were doing it on company time and with company money. But I needed more than circumstantial evidence. I needed to hear their actual plans, in their own words. Installing recording software in our main conference room felt like crossing a moral line. But discovering my family's betrayal had shattered most of my ethical certainties. Technically, it was legal I owned the building and had the right to monitor activities on my property. Morally, it felt like another piece of my soul being carved away. For 2 weeks, I collected fragments. Discussions about leadership transitions and structural inefficiencies. References to dilution strategies and board alignment. Repeated mentions of my resistance to change and outdated technical focus. Each snippet confirmed my worst fears while raising new questions. How long had this been planned? How many people were involved? What exactly was their endgame? The breakthrough came on a Wednesday evening when I was supposed to be at a tech conference in San Francisco. I'd actually returned early with a stress-induced migraine that left me nauseous and disoriented. Instead of going home, I drove to the office, hoping the familiar environment might provide some comfort. The building should have been empty at 8 p.m., but I saw lights in the main conference room and several familiar cars in the parking lot, including those belonging to Kevin, Amanda, and Ryan. My hands shook as I activated the recording system from my phone, positioning myself in the adjacent supply room where I could hear clearly through the thin walls. The documentation is comprehensive, Kevin was saying, his voice carrying the confidence I'd once admired. Every missed deadline, every client complaint, every strategic disagreement. We've built an airtight case that Melanie's leadership has become a liability, but she still owns 51%. Came Bernard West's voice, one of our longest-serving board members. Corporate law is clear about majority ownership rights. That's where Patricia comes in, Ryan replied, and I heard a new voice I didn't recognize. I specialize in corporate restructuring cases, the woman explained. There's a clause in your original incorporation document, section 12.4, that allows for emergency share dilution if the board determines the CEO is acting against company interests. My mouth went dry. I'd signed those documents 9 years ago, trusting my lawyer's assurance that the boilerplate language was standard protection for investors. I'd never imagined it being used as a weapon against me by my own family. The legal mechanism exists, Patricia continued, but we need overwhelming evidence of mismanagement or breach of fiduciary duty. From what you've shown me, we have that. What's the timeline? Asked Diane Chambers, another board member whose presence surprised me. I'd considered her an ally. Amanda's voice answered, thick with false regret. We can't delay much longer. The IPO preparations are highlighting her limitations daily. Yesterday's client presentation was embarrassing. She got so bogged down in technical details that she completely lost the strategic narrative. I remembered that presentation. The client had actually praised our thorough approach, but apparently my family had been spinning it differently to the board. The vote needs to be unanimous among non-family board members, Patricia explained. Then we issue new shares sufficient to dilute her ownership below 50%. Legally, she becomes a minority shareholder overnight. And the Technovate angle? Bernard asked. My blood turned to ice at Ryan's response. Jonathan Grant has been very accommodating. If this internal restructuring doesn't achieve the desired results, they're prepared to make a direct acquisition offer. He's been clear that they'd welcome our leadership team with appropriate compensation packages. Kevin's voice carried a satisfaction that made me sick. Jonathan and I have been discussing possibilities for months. They see the same growth limitations we do. Melanie's small business mentality is holding back a company that could dominate the enterprise market. Months. This wasn't a recent crisis response or IPO pressure reaction. This was a calculated, long-term conspiracy involving our biggest competitor. I still feel uncomfortable about this, Diane admitted. Melanie built this company from nothing. Her vision and sacrifice created everything we're trying to protect. Which is exactly why this is so difficult, Amanda replied, her voice perfectly calibrated for maximum manipulation. We love Melanie. She's brilliant. But love means making hard decisions sometimes. The company has outgrown her capabilities, and pretending otherwise would be the real betrayal of our employees, our clients, and our investors. The transition would be handled delicately, Kevin added. She'd retain a ceremonial position, founder and CTO perhaps, generous compensation, limited responsibilities, public recognition for her contributions. It's actually the best outcome for everyone. A ceremonial position in my own company, generous compensation for the business I'd built with my own hands. They were discussing my professional execution with the compassionate tone people used when putting down a beloved family pet. When do we move? Bernard asked. Next week. Kevin replied firmly. We'll call an emergency board meeting, present the evidence, and vote. Once the dilution is approved, we inform Melanie of the new structure. By the time she can respond legally, it'll be done. She won't go quietly, Ryan warned. She won't have a choice, Patricia said coldly. The legal framework will be ironclad, and frankly, given the evidence of her deteriorating performance, any challenge she makes will only reinforce our position. I'd heard enough. More than enough. Fighting nausea that had nothing to do with pregnancy hormones. I carefully backed away from the conference room and slipped out of the building. Sitting in my car in the dark parking lot, I let the reality wash over me. My family, people I'd trusted with my deepest vulnerabilities, people I'd given opportunities they'd never have had elsewhere, were planning to steal my company using legal technicalities and manufactured evidence. The betrayal cut deeper than any business loss could. These weren't just employees or partners. These were people who'd sat at my childhood dinner table, who'd celebrated holidays together, who'd claimed to love me while systematically documenting my every perceived flaw. My phone buzzed with a text from Kevin. Hope the conference is going well. Looking forward to catching up when you're back. The casual deception in that message, pretending concern while plotting my destruction, crystallized something cold and determined in my chest. They thought they held all the cards. They thought I was naive and trusting. They were about to learn otherwise. The next morning, I called in sick and spent the day conducting the most thorough investigation of my life. If my family had been building a case against me for months, I needed to understand not just their methods, but their motivations. Kevin's psychology proved the most complex. Our parents had always praised my academic achievements while glossing over his learning struggles. In college, I'd graduated summa cum laude while he barely maintained a B average. When I started Innovate Tech, he was working a mid-level accounting position at a firm that was downsizing. I found evidence of his resentment buried in old emails and social media posts, comments to friends about lucky breaks and being in the right place at the right time, jokes about riding the family coattails that carried more bitterness than humor. The Technovate connection had been cultivated carefully. Phone records showed that Jonathan Grant first contacted Kevin 8 months ago, right after our IPO discussions became public. Their initial conversation led to a chance meeting at an industry conference, then regular lunches positioned as networking. But the most damning evidence came from Kevin's personal laptop, which I accessed using an old password he'd shared years ago. A folder labeled Future Planning contained detailed financial projections showing his expected compensation as CFO of a larger, more prestigious company. Technovate's offer wasn't just about money, it was about finally escaping my shadow and claiming recognition as a serious business leader. Amanda's situation was different but equally painful to discover. Despite the success of her marketing campaigns, she'd been secretly interviewing with other companies for months, not because she wanted to leave, but because she needed external validation that her skills were valuable beyond her connection to me. Her personal journal, which she'd been foolish enough to sync to the company cloud drive, revealed deep insecurities masked by professional confidence. Entry after entry detailed her frustration with being seen as Melanie's sister rather than a marketing professional in her own right. Another industry article about Innovate Tech's success. Read one entry from 3 months ago. 3 paragraphs about Melanie's vision and technical brilliance, 1 sentence about effective marketing strategies. Would anyone even know my name if I wasn't a Mitchell? The pregnancy announcement had apparently triggered her worst fears. Now she'll have a family legacy beyond just the company, she'd written. Her children will inherit everything she's built, while I'll always be the sister who helped. Ryan's motivations were the darkest. His startup failure 2 years before joining us had been spectacular, a social media platform that burned through $2 million in investor funding before collapsing due to technical problems and market misjudgment. The industry hadn't been kind in its post-mortem analysis. Joining Innovate Tech hadn't been family loyalty. It had been career rehabilitation. Our success became his redemption story, but only if he could claim credit for significant growth during his tenure. The IPO represented his chance to emerge from the shadow of his previous failure as a legitimate business leader. I discovered he'd been systematically taking credit for company achievements, positioning himself as the strategic mind behind our enterprise client expansion. His LinkedIn profile described him as instrumental in scaling Innovate Tech's revenue from $10 to $50 annually growth that had actually started before he joined and resulted from product improvements he'd had nothing to do with. But the most devastating discovery was a private group chat between the 3 of them, created 18 months ago and titled Future Leadership. Months of messages revealed their growing frustration with my management style, their shared belief that I was holding back the company's potential, and their gradually escalating plans to address the Melanie problem. She micromanages everything, Kevin had written 6 months ago, spends hours on technical details that our engineers could handle while ignoring strategic opportunities that could triple our revenue. The board is starting to notice, Amanda had replied. Diane mentioned yesterday that Melanie seemed overwhelmed during the quarterly review. Jonathan Grant told me something interesting at lunch. Ryan had added, Technovate's enterprise clients are asking specifically for solutions like ours, but they want a vendor who understands large-scale deployment. They see us as too small business focused. The messages showed how they'd fed each other's resentment while building a narrative of my inadequacy. Each family gathering, each company meeting, each client interaction had been analyzed and critiqued in this private forum where I had no voice to defend myself. They'd turned documentation into a weapon, carefully cataloging every mistake while ignoring every success. When I'd been late to a meeting due to a client emergency, they'd noted it as poor time management. When I'd questioned a risky expansion proposal, they'd recorded it as resistance to growth. Most painfully, they'd been bonding over their shared frustration with me. The group chat revealed inside jokes, mutual support, and emotional intimacy that had replaced the family relationships I thought still existed. While I'd been working to build something we could all be proud of, they'd been building solidarity around the belief that I was the obstacle to their success. The pregnancy had added urgency to their timeline. She's going to be distracted for months, Amanda had written after I'd shared the news. Maternity leave, reduced focus, emotional volatility. If we're going to move, now is the time. Agreed, Kevin had replied. Jonathan mentioned that Technovate is looking to make major acquisitions before the end of the fiscal year. The timing couldn't be better. Ryan's response had been the most callous. Pregnancy brain is real. We can use her emotional state and decision-making issues as additional documentation if needed. Reading those words, I felt something fundamental break inside me. They weren't just planning to steal my company, they were prepared to weaponize my pregnancy against me. I closed the laptop and sat in silence, processing the full scope of their betrayal. This wasn't a business dispute or a strategic disagreement. This was character assassination by people who claimed to love me, carried out with the precision of a military campaign. The worst part was recognizing how skillfully they'd manipulated me. Every suggestion to delegate more or focus on your strengths had been designed to create distance between me and the operational decisions they wanted to control. Every expression of concern about my stress levels or work-life balance had been groundwork for arguments about my diminished capabilities. They'd turned my trust against me, using my willingness to include them in major decisions as evidence of my inability to lead independently. They'd weaponized my dedication to the company, framing my hands-on management style as micromanagement and control issues. I'd built Innovate Tech to create opportunities for people I loved. Instead, I'd given those people the tools to destroy me. But I wasn't destroyed yet. And if they thought pregnancy had made me weak or emotional, they were about to discover how wrong they could be. The decision to sell my controlling stake in Innovate Tech didn't come easily, despite everything I'd discovered. For 2 sleepless nights, I wrestled with alternatives fighting their coup attempt, restructuring the board, buying out their equity positions. But every scenario ended with the same fundamental problem. How do you continue working with people who've betrayed you so thoroughly? Rachel Solomon, my personal attorney, laid out the harsh realities during an emergency consultation I'd requested for Thursday morning. They're using a classic hostile takeover strategy against a family member, she explained, reviewing the documents I'd brought. The legal framework they're building is sophisticated and potentially effective. Even if we successfully defend against it, the process would be brutal, public, and destructive to company value. What if I fight it anyway? You could win. Your track record as CEO is strong, the company's performance has been excellent, and their evidence of mismanagement is largely subjective. But Melanie, consider the cost: months of legal battles, media attention, employee uncertainty, client defections. Win or lose, Innovate Tech would be significantly damaged. And if I sell my shares... Rachel leaned back in her chair, studying me carefully. You maintain complete control of the narrative and timing. Plus, given the IPO discussions and current market conditions, your 51% stake could be worth significantly more than its book value to the right buyer. How much more? Conservatively 60 to 70 million. But if there's competitive interest, potentially much higher. The number was staggering. I'd known Innovate Tech was valuable, but hearing it quantified in terms of personal wealth felt surreal. More importantly, selling would allow me to protect the company and its employees while ensuring my family couldn't benefit from their betrayal. I need you to reach out to Jonathan Grant at Technovate, I said, quietly, very quietly. Rachel raised an eyebrow. The same Technovate that's been courting your brother. The very same. I want to know if they're serious about acquiring Innovate Tech. And if so, what they'd be willing to pay for controlling interest. That's actually brilliant, Rachel said slowly. If they've been planning to acquire the company anyway, offering them direct access to majority ownership could be extremely attractive. With conditions, the acquisition needs to happen immediately within 72 hours. Kevin, Amanda, and Ryan are terminated upon closing with standard severance packages, and absolute confidentiality until the deal is done. Melanie, that timeline is nearly impossible. Then we make it possible. Rachel, they're calling an emergency board meeting next week to execute their plan. We need to move faster than they can react. The call to Jonathan Grant felt like stepping off a cliff. I'd rejected his acquisition overtures multiple times over the years, positioned as protecting Innovate Tech's independence and culture. Now I was about to offer him exactly what he'd wanted, but under circumstances I couldn't fully explain. Melanie, Jonathan said when his assistant put me through, this is unexpected. How can I help you? I'm considering selling my controlling stake in Innovate Tech. Are you still interested in acquisition discussions? The silence that followed lasted so long, I wondered if the call had dropped. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "Did you say you're considering selling? You've been quite clear about wanting to remain independent?" "Circumstances change. I'd prefer not to discuss the details over the phone, but I'm prepared to move quickly if terms are attractive." "How quickly?" 72 hours from agreement to closing." Another long pause. "Melanie, that's an extraordinarily compressed timeline for a transaction of this magnitude. May I ask what's driving the urgency?" "Let's just say I've learned some things about the people I trusted, and I'd prefer to maintain control of how this situation unfolds." Jonathan was too experienced not to read between the lines. "I see. Can you meet this afternoon in my office, say 3 o'clock? I'll be there?" "Bien." The meeting lasted 4 hours. Jonathan brought his CFO and head of corporate development. I brought Rachel and a stack of financial documents. The conversation was professional, but charged with unspoken tension. Everyone knew this wasn't a normal acquisition discussion. "Let me be direct," Jonathan said after reviewing our preliminary materials. "Innovate Tech fits perfectly with our strategic expansion plans. We've been hoping for an opportunity like this for years, but the timeline you're proposing presents significant challenges." "What kind of challenges?" His CFO answered. "Due diligence, board approval, financing arrangements, regulatory review. Normally we'd need 6 to 8 weeks minimum. What if due diligence was limited to financial verification and legal structure review? What if I provided personal guarantees for any undisclosed liabilities?" "That would help," Jonathan admitted. "But our board still needs to approve a transaction this size." "I can make myself available for any board calls or meetings. I'll provide whatever documentation you need. The question is whether Technovate wants Innovate Tech enough to move at startup speed." The number they proposed, $85 million for, my 51%, exceeded even Rachel's optimistic projections. More importantly, Jonathan agreed to my conditions about immediate employment termination for Kevin, Amanda, and Ryan. "I assume there's a story behind that requirement," he said carefully. "One you'll understand soon enough. Can your team work through the night if necessary? For a deal like this, absolutely." By Thursday evening, armies of lawyers were working on both sides to compress months of work into 3 days. Document review, financial verification, regulatory filings, everything accelerated to an almost reckless pace. But acceleration brought complications I hadn't anticipated. The first crisis emerged Friday morning. Technovate's board needed convincing that such a rapid acquisition made strategic sense. Their emergency meeting, hastily scheduled for Friday afternoon, would determine whether our timeline was realistic or completely impossible. "Some board members are concerned about due diligence shortcuts," Jonathan explained during a tense phone call. "They're asking legitimate questions about what could be driving such urgent timing." "What do you need from me?" "A presentation. Friday at 2 o'clock. You'll need to convince 6 very conservative board members that acquiring Innovate Tech immediately is worth the procedural risks." I'd given thousands of presentations in my career, but never one where the stakes felt this personal. Technovate's boardroom was intimidating mahogany table, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, 6 stern faces examining me like a specimen under a microscope. My presentation was crisp and comprehensive. Innovate Tech's financial performance, market position, growth trajectory, and strategic value to Technovate. I answered questions about competitive threats, technical capabilities, and client retention with the confidence of someone who'd built the company from nothing. But the hardest question came last. "Ms. Mitchell," said Eleanor Park, Technovate's lead independent director, "you've consistently rejected acquisition overtures for years. What's changed in the past week to make you suddenly interested in selling?" The room fell silent. 6 pairs of eyes studied me, waiting for an answer that would either make or break our timeline. "I've discovered that some people I trusted completely have been working against my interests," I said carefully. "Rather than engage in a destructive internal conflict, I've decided to ensure Innovate Tech's future by placing it with leadership I respect. Eleanor leaned forward. Are you saying there's an internal threat to company stability? I'm saying there are individuals within the organization who have priorities that conflict with long-term success. Removing that conflict benefits everyone. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was honest enough to satisfy their concerns. The board voted unanimously to proceed. But Friday afternoon brought a worse complication. I discovered that Kevin had infiltrated my legal team. We have a serious confidentiality breach, Rachel informed me with barely controlled fury. Sarah Morrison, the junior associate handling document review, has been feeding information to your brother. Phone records show multiple calls between them over the past week. My stomach dropped. How much does she know? Too much. Meeting schedules, attorney consultations, document requests. Kevin knows you've been planning something, even if he doesn't know what. The implications were devastating. If Kevin suspected I was making moves, he might accelerate his own timeline. The emergency board meeting could happen sooner than expected, possibly before our deal could close. There's more, Rachel continued grimly. Someone leaked information about unusual activity at Innovate Tech to TechCrunch. Their reporter is asking questions about leadership changes and potential acquisitions. Media attention was the last thing we needed. If speculation about internal conflicts became public before our sale closed, everything could unravel. Technovate's board might reconsider. My family might rush their coup attempt. The carefully orchestrated timing could collapse into chaos. Friday night. I lay awake calculating scenarios and contingencies. My pregnancy symptoms were worsening under stress, constant nausea, exhaustion that sleep couldn't cure, and concerning episodes of dizziness that made Brian insist on driving me everywhere. This has to stop, he said Saturday morning, finding me at the kitchen table surrounded by legal documents and laptop screens at 3 a.m. Look at yourself, Mel. You're destroying your health over something that might not even be worth saving. It's not about the money, I whispered, my voice hoarse from exhaustion. It's about not letting them win. What if winning costs us our baby? The question haunted me, but the alternative felt impossible. Letting my family steal my company would mean watching them benefit from a decade of my sacrifice while positioning themselves as the real architects of Innovate Tech's success. The injustice burned in my chest like acid. Saturday brought the final crisis. Kevin called an emergency board meeting for Monday morning, 3 days earlier than originally planned. Your presence is required. His email read, "We need to discuss immediate structural changes necessary for continued growth and IPO preparation." The timeline had collapsed. Technovate's lawyers were still working through regulatory filings that wouldn't be complete until Tuesday. Our deal couldn't close before Kevin's board meeting, unless we did something desperate. There's one option, Rachel said during an emergency Saturday afternoon conference call that included Jonathan and both legal teams. We can execute a letter of intent with binding commitment. Not the full sale, but an irrevocable agreement that becomes effective immediately upon document completion. Is that legal? I asked. Technically, yes. Extremely unusual, but legal. It would give Technovate immediate control while we finish the paperwork. Jonathan was quiet for a long moment. That's a substantial risk for both parties. If anything goes wrong with the documentation, then we're all in trouble, I finished. But if we wait, Kevin's board meeting happens first, and everything becomes infinitely more complicated. What do you need from me? Jonathan asked. Faith, I replied. Faith that this is the right decision for both our companies. Sunday. We signed documents that would have given corporate lawyers nightmares, binding letters of intent, irrevocable commitments, and personal guarantees that pushed legal creativity to its absolute limits. Not the full transaction, but enough to ensure that Monday morning's board meeting would unfold very differently than my family expected. At 11:58 p.m. Sunday night, I received final confirmation Technovate had deposited $85 million into an escrow account controlled by our combined legal teams. The funds would transfer to me immediately upon completion of documentation, expected by Tuesday afternoon. For all practical purposes, I was no longer the controlling owner of Innovate Tech. Kevin's text arrived at 6:47 a.m. Monday morning. Board meeting at 10 a.m. Don't be late. I smiled grimly and typed back, wouldn't miss it for the world. I arrived at the office at 9:30 a.m. Monday morning, 30 minutes before Kevin's emergency board meeting. The familiar hallways felt different, still mine for a few more hours, but already psychologically distant. I was walking through my past, not my future. The main conference room was set up like a tribunal. Kevin had positioned himself at the head of the table with Amanda to his right and Ryan to his left. Their attorney, Patricia, sat nearby with a stack of documents and recording equipment. Bernard and Diane sat across from them, both looking uncomfortable with the formal atmosphere. I took my usual seat at the opposite end of the table and waited. Thank you all for coming on short notice. Kevin began when everyone had arrived. We're here to address urgent concerns about Innovate Tech's leadership and direction. Before we begin, I want to emphasize that this isn't personal. We're here because we believe changes are necessary for the company's continued success. Interesting perspective, I replied calmly. Before you continue, I'd like to share something with the group. I placed a small wireless speaker on the table and connected my phone. This recording was made legally on property I own, in this very room, last Wednesday evening. Kevin's confident expression flickered as I pressed play. Their own voices filled the conference room. The documentation is comprehensive. Every missed deadline, every client complaint, every strategic disagreement. We've built an airtight case that Melanie's leadership has become a liability. There's a clause in your original incorporation documents, Section 12.4, that allows for emergency share dilution if the board determines the CEO is acting against company interests. Jonathan Grant has been very accommodating. If this internal restructuring doesn't achieve the desired results, they're prepared to make a direct acquisition offer. I watched the color drain from their faces as their conspiracy played out in their own words. Bernard and Diane exchanged shocked glances. They'd been told this meeting was about performance issues, not a calculated coup attempt involving our biggest competitor. When the recording ended, silence filled the room like a toxic cloud. That recording is inadmissible and possibly illegal, Patricia said quickly, but her voice lacked conviction. Actually, it's completely legal, I replied. This building is my property, and I have every right to monitor activities within it. But more importantly, it's completely true. Every word you just heard. Kevin recovered first, his face hardening into the expression I'd seen during childhood arguments, when he knew he was wrong, but refused to admit it. You forced our hand, Mel, he said coldly. The company needs leadership that can take us to the next level. Your resistance to change, your micromanagement, your inability to see beyond small business thinking, it's all holding us back. Is that your professional opinion? I asked, opening the folder I'd brought. Because according to my documentation, every decision you've criticized has actually increased our revenue, market share, or client satisfaction. Would you like me to present those numbers? I began laying out financial reports, client feedback forms, and growth metrics that systematically demolished every criticism they'd raised. Kevin's face grew redder with each document. Amanda broke first, tears streaming down her cheeks. We never meant to hurt you, Mel. We thought the company needed to evolve, and you seemed so resistant to change. Resistant to change, I replied, or resistant to being manipulated by people who were secretly building relationships with our competitors while documenting my every perceived flaw. Ryan leaned forward aggressively. You've been impossible to work with for months, micromanaging everything. shutting down innovative ideas, treating us like employees instead of partners. Partners don't conspire behind partners' backs, I said evenly. Partners don't build secret alliances with competitors. Partners don't weaponize family relationships for corporate gain. What do you want, Melanie? Bernard asked quietly. What's your endgame here? I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the letter of intent I'd signed with Technovate, placing it on the table where everyone could see the official letterhead. As of midnight last night, Technovate holds a binding commitment to acquire 51% of Innovate Tech for $85 million. The transaction becomes final upon completion of documentation, expected tomorrow afternoon. The room erupted in chaos. Kevin shouted about fiduciary duty violations and shareholder rights. Amanda wailed that I couldn't destroy the family business. Ryan threatened lawsuits and criminal charges. "You vindictive bitch!" Kevin snarled, his corporate mask finally dropping completely. "You'd rather burn everything down than let us help it grow." "I'm not burning anything down," I replied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. "I'm protecting it. From you." "Melanie," Diane said shakily, "this is extraordinary. You sold your controlling stake without board consultation. I sold my personal shares, which required no board approval. Technovate is now the majority stakeholder. They've requested immediate termination of Kevin, Amanda, and Ryan with standard severance packages." At that moment, the conference room door opened and Jonathan Grant entered with 2 security personnel. "Ms. Mitchell," Jonathan said formally, "we're here to facilitate the transition as discussed." Kevin stood up so quickly, his chair fell backward. "You can't do this. We have contracts, protections, legal rights, which will all be honored," Jonathan replied calmly. "Your severance packages are generous, and your non-compete clauses will be waived, but your employment is terminated effective immediately." Amanda sobbed louder. "Mel, please, we can fix this. We're family. Family doesn't do this to each other." The irony of that statement would have been funny if it weren't so painful. "You're right," I said quietly. "Family doesn't do this to each other, which is why what you planned was so devastating." Ryan pointed an accusing finger at me. "This isn't over. We'll challenge the sale, expose your mental instability, prove you acted against company interests." "With what evidence?" I asked. "That I protected a profitable company from being stolen by family members who were secretly collaborating with competitors." Good luck with that narrative. Security escorted them out one by one. Kevin left with threats and accusations. Amanda left with tears and pleas for reconciliation. Ryan left with promises of legal revenge. As the door closed behind them, I felt empty. Not victorious or relieved, just hollow. 10 years of building something beautiful, and it had come to this. "Melanie," Bernard said after a long silence, "I owe you an apology. We had no idea about the scope of their planning. The concerns they brought to us seemed legitimate." "They were skilled manipulators," I replied. "You couldn't have known." "What happens now?" Diane asked. "Technovate takes operational control. The employees keep their jobs. The company continues growing. And I paused, realizing I hadn't thought beyond this moment. "I figure out what comes next." Jonathan approached as the board members filed out. "Are you all right?" "Ask me tomorrow," I said, suddenly feeling exhausted beyond measure. "For what it's worth, I think you made the right choice. They left you no alternative." I nodded, but wondered if being right was worth the cost of losing everything I'd thought was permanent in my life. The company I'd built from nothing was safe. The people I'd loved most were gone forever. And somewhere between victory and devastation, I had to figure out who I was without either one. The tech industry exploded with the news. within hours. Headlines appeared across major publications. Family coup triggers surprise acquisition. Innovate Tech founder outmaneuvers siblings. When family business goes wrong. The story had everything journalists loved: betrayal, corporate intrigue, family drama, and a dramatic reversal. My phone rang constantly with interview requests, which I declined. Technovate's PR team handled all communication, positioning the acquisition as a strategic expansion rather than a hostile takeover response. Employee reactions varied dramatically. Some were shocked and concerned about job security. Others admitted they'd sensed growing tension in leadership. Jesse, my original CTO, sent a simple text, "Saw it coming, good for you. Call when you're ready." The broader market responded positively. Technovate's stock price rose on news of the acquisition, validating the strategic value. Several competitors publicly praised the move, though I suspected relief that they wouldn't have to face an independent IPO from us. My family's response was swift and brutal. Kevin hired an attorney within hours, threatening to challenge the sale on every possible ground. Amanda gave a tearful interview to a tech blogger, painting herself as a victim of sibling rivalry. Ryan started spreading rumors about my unstable behavior and erratic decision-making. But the most painful consequence was personal. The stress and emotional trauma triggered complications with my pregnancy. I spent 3 days in the hospital while doctors monitored concerning symptoms and adjusted medications. "Your blood pressure is dangerously elevated," Dr. Martinez explained. "We need to discuss bed rest and possibly extended medical leave." "The baby," I whispered. "Currently stable, but we're concerned about preeclampsia development. The next few weeks are critical." Brian barely left my hospital bedside, handling calls from lawyers, reporters, and well-wishers. His own practice suffered as he managed my crisis. But he never complained. "Was it worth it?" he asked one evening as we watched monitors tracking our baby's heartbeat. "Ask me in a year," I replied, not sure I believed my own optimism. Recovery was slower than I'd expected. Doctor's orders confined me to bed rest for 6 weeks, during which I had little to do but process everything that had happened. The initial adrenaline rush of victory faded, replaced by grief for the relationships I'd lost and uncertainty about my future. Brian arranged for me to work with Dr. Lisa Winters, a therapist specializing in entrepreneur burnout and family estrangement. Our sessions became lifelines during those dark weeks. "What you experienced was profound betrayal by the people you trusted most," she explained during our 3rd session. "It's natural to feel grief, even when you made the right decision for self-protection." How do I trust anyone again? Slowly, carefully, but most importantly, by learning to distinguish between earned trust and assumed trust. The legal battles proved less threatening than expected. Rachel's team systematically dismantled every challenge my family raised. The sale documentation was ironclad, the process legitimate, and their conspiracy clearly documented. After burning through their severance money on attorney fees, they eventually dropped all claims. Meanwhile, Technovate's integration proceeded smoothly. Jonathan kept his promises about retaining key staff and maintaining Innovate Tech's culture. Revenue actually increased under their broader market reach and enhanced resources. "You built something remarkable," Jonathan told me during one of his hospital visits. "We're honored to be its stewards." "Take care of my people," I replied. "They didn't deserve to get caught in family drama." As my health stabilized and the pregnancy progressed normally, I began considering my next chapter. The $85 million settlement provided financial independence beyond my wildest dreams, but money alone couldn't fill the professional void. I started reading about other entrepreneurs who'd faced similar challenges, reaching out to women who'd navigated family business conflicts or hostile takeovers. Their stories provided perspective and, gradually, inspiration. The idea that would define my next phase came during a conversation with Maria Santos, a Latina founder who'd lost her company to investor manipulation. "I spent 2 years angry," she told me over coffee. "Then I realized my experience could help others avoid the same mistakes. That's when I started consulting. Using my experience to guide other founders through similar challenges, helping them protect themselves legally, structurally, and emotionally before crisis hit. 8 months after selling Innovate Tech, I launched Mitchell Advisory, a specialized consulting firm for entrepreneurs facing family business conflicts or hostile takeover attempts. The demand was immediate and overwhelming. "There are so many of us," explained Catherine Liu, my first client, whose brothers were pressuring her to sell the medical device company she'd founded. Successful founders who brought in family and now regret it. But nobody talks about it publicly. My approach was systematic legal structure analysis, family dynamics assessment, crisis planning, and exit strategy development. Unlike traditional business consultants, I understood the emotional complexity of family betrayal and the psychological manipulation tactics I'd experienced. The work was deeply fulfilling in ways Innovate Tech's success had never been. Instead of building products, I was protecting people's dreams and life's work. 6 months later, I expanded with Ground Floor Ventures, an investment fund specifically for women-founded startups. Rather than just providing capital, we offered comprehensive support, legal guidance, family business structuring, and mentorship networks. Our first cohort included 12 companies across various industries. Working with these brilliant women reminded me why I'd fallen in love with entrepreneurship, originally the pure joy of building something meaningful. Brian and I welcomed our daughter, Sarah, right as Ground Floor's first portfolio company achieved its first major customer milestone. Holding my baby while celebrating another woman's business success felt like the universe offering redemption for everything I'd lost. "She's going to grow up watching her mom help other women build their dreams," Brian said, gently touching Sarah's tiny hand. What a legacy. But healing remained incomplete. The absence of my family, once so central to my identity, created a persistent ache. Holidays felt hollow. Sarah would grow up without aunts, uncles, or cousins from my side. The cost of protecting myself had been higher than I'd initially calculated. 2 years after selling Innovate Tech, Amanda reached out through Rachel's office, requesting a meeting. Her message was simple but profound. "I'm ready to take responsibility for what I did. No excuses, no justifications, just accountability." We met at a small cafe, far from anywhere we might encounter former colleagues or industry contacts. Amanda looked older, more subdued, but somehow more authentic than I remembered. "I've been in therapy for 18 months, she began without preamble. "Not because of what happened to me, but because of what I did to you. I need you to know I understand now how destructive my jealousy was." Jealousy. Of everything. Your intelligence, your vision, your courage to start something from nothing. Instead of being proud of my sister's success, I resented it. I convinced myself I deserved equal credit for your achievements. We talked for 3 hours about family dynamics, personal growth, and the choices that had led us to that devastating confrontation. Amanda had used her severance to return to school for an advanced marketing degree and was building a consulting practice focused on small nonprofit organizations. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said as we prepared to leave. "I'm not asking to be part of your life again. I just needed you to know that I see clearly now what I did, and I'm trying to become someone who would never do it again." "What about Kevin and Ryan?" Her expression darkened. "Kevin is still angry, still blaming you for overreacting. Ryan has convinced himself he was the real visionary at Innovate Tech, and you held him back. They haven't learned anything." I never reconnected with Kevin or Ryan. Occasional industry gossip suggested Kevin was doing well financially, but struggled with personal relationships. Ryan had launched another startup that failed spectacularly. burning bridges with investors who remembered our family drama. Amanda and I established careful boundaries holiday cards, occasional coffee meetings, polite distance, not reconciliation exactly, but acknowledgement of shared history and mutual respect for growth. My consulting firm thrived, expanding to include male founders facing similar family conflicts. Ground Floor Ventures became one of the most successful female-focused funds in the region, with 8 of our original 12 companies achieving significant exits or expansion rounds. Innovate Tech continued growing under Technovate's ownership, eventually going public through their parent company's umbrella. Seeing my original creation succeed vindicated my decision to prioritize its preservation over family loyalty. But the most meaningful validation came from unexpected sources. Dr. Winters introduced me to support groups for entrepreneurs who'd faced family betrayal. Their stories, remarkably similar, despite different industries and circumstances, reinforced that my experience wasn't unique or shameful. "You saved your company," said David Kim, whose father and brother had tried to force him out of the restaurant chain he'd built. "More importantly, you saved yourself. That takes courage most people don't possess." 3 years later, Brian and I were expecting our second child when I received an invitation that surprised me: Kevin's wedding. Not a reconciliation attempt, but perhaps an acknowledgement that life had moved forward for all of us. I didn't attend, but I sent a gift with a note, "Wishing you happiness in your new beginning." Looking back, I'd lost a family, but gained something more valuable: the knowledge that I could protect what mattered most, even when it cost everything I thought I wanted. My daughter would grow up understanding that loyalty is earned, not assumed, and that sometimes the greatest love requires the hardest choices. The company I'd built from nothing in my parents' garage had become something larger than any individual ownership, a platform for innovation, employment, and growth that would outlast any family drama. And I'd built something new from the ashes, a life defined by my choices rather than others' betrayals. That felt like victory enough.